with tonight's big number, 7,103. That is the number of new COVID-19 cases tallied today in the country, the highest single-day rise in infections. This beats the over 6,900 cases recorded in August last year.
The record spike brings total infections in the country to 648,066. 11% are active cases at more than 73,000, the highest yet since August last year. The 7-day moving average of cases is now at 5,217. Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Ed Lingao. You're watching The Big Story. This record high in new cases came earlier than the Octa Research Group's projections. In their forecast earlier this month, Octa had said that daily cases may climb to 7,000 to 8,000 by the end of March.
But only at mid-month, that number has already been breached. In Metro Manila alone, daily cases have increased fivefold. Octa says from an average of 500 last month, NCR logged close to 2,500 new infections daily from March 12 to 18. If the surge continues, the research group projects an average of 4,000 to 5,000 new daily cases in the capital by the end of March.
There have also been marked increases in occupancy both for hospital and ICU beds. Close to 3,600 hospital beds are already being used in Metro Manila. 721 ICU beds are also occupied. Octa projects that should the surge continue, bed occupancy will reach 80% by April 10. And now to help us make sense of these record-breaking numbers, we have with us Dr David of the UP Octa Research. He is joining us live via StreamYard. Sir, thank you again for joining us and welcome back.
Yes, hi, good evening, Ed and Gretchen.
Yes, sir. Well sir, 7,100 coming from what? 4,000 to 5,000 in the past few days. Are we looking at a new trend or is this a one-off?
Well, it's the same trend pa rin from the one we were seeing. Of course, nag-increasing trend compared to what we thought was the trend ng beginning of March, and that's why napaaga yung projections. We're seeing it earlier than we thought we should, pero this is we're still seeing around 10,000 to 11,000 cases per day in the Philippines by end of March. Based on that current trend, it's based on the reproduction number of around 1.9, which is what we are seeing right now, 1.9 to 2.
Sir, let me go back a bit. You're saying you are now seeing, if the trend continues, 10,000 to 11,000 new cases per day by the end of March. Did I hear you correctly? Because previously, I think it was sometime last week, we were still looking at 8,000 per day by the end of March.
Yes, now we're looking at around 10 to 11,000. I mean, syempre, as always, we hope we are wrong sa projections, or we hope that we beat the projections in the sense that we can lower the numbers, and that's why we're always calling for people to support yung wear face mask and follow yung health guidelines, because we don't want to reach these numbers. These are very bad numbers. This is a nightmare for us. We have the highest number of cases now, and it's not the end. This is not the end. It will still go higher than this. And I mean, ano na gagawin natin?
Yes, sir. Well, I do remember last week you had projections as well for the middle of April. You were looking at possibly 18,000, but that was with a lower figure that you earlier had for the end of March. I'm wondering now if you have new computations for the middle of April.
Well, we haven't looked that far yet, Ed, kasi, well, una, we haven't gotten the latest data from Department of Health. We're still waiting on it. And secondly, we're hoping na somehow yung localized lockdowns, curfew ordinances, city ordinances, and this new circuit breaker ng Malacanang, which will limit capacity in certain establishments. We hope those will have an effect on the numbers and the trend. We were starting to see a slight decrease sa R, but I think because of today's number, tumaas ulit yung reproduction number. I haven't calculated it yet, pero we're gonna see. But we hope that the efforts of the local governments will help in reducing the reproduction number. Hindi pa tayo pupunta sa downward trend, but at least we can slow it down somehow.
Yes, sir. Well, certainly alarming numbers coming from Professor Guido David, 10 to 11,000 possibly by the end of the month. Thank you, sir. That was Professor Guido David of the Octa research team. For the private sector, it is the government's loss for not allowing companies to directly buy shots from manufacturers. With additional vaccine batches arriving, a palace advisor says it may now be the time to push the private sector up the priority list. Why is that? Joey Francisco tells us.
Hindi po natin pinipigilan ng private sector, pero gustuhin man nila, they cannot go to a manufacturer and purchase on their own.
For the palace, there's no way that the private sector can directly procure vaccines. But this did not sit well with the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. They told the chiefs the country is missing out.
We deserve a logical explanation para maintindihan natin because it is more logical na payagan yung mag-import lahat para makatulong sa bayan. We kind of lost 2 months because if in fact action was done at that time.
But the palace won't budge, vouching for tripartite agreements with the national government as the sector's only option. This is crucial for Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship Joey Concepcion. Speaking to 1PH's Tatotoo Lang, he said vaccines available are only for emergency use and not for commercial sale. But he agreed that the private sector should eventually be bumped up in the inoculation priority list.
Don't make us wait all the way at the back. Move us in front because anyway we're giving you half of our allocation already.
Health Secretary Francisco Duque says they will still look into the PCCI's request.
Gusto lang natin siguraduhin na ang gobyerno, yung kanyang prioritization framework talagang nasusunod.
The 2.8 million AstraZeneca vaccine doses procured by the private sector are expected to arrive by May at the earliest. After this, Concepcion said the sector will no longer donate shots to the government.
After AstraZeneca, lahat ng mga vaccines na binili ng private sector, wala nang donation. Dito lang sa AstraZeneca.
Adding to the sector's stock, 20 million Moderna doses. The Ayala Group and business tycoon Enrique Razon signed a tripartite deal for the shots. 13 million doses will go to the government, 7 million doses for the private sector. But Moderna has yet to apply for emergency use approval. Joey Francisco, we are One News.
These are the other big stories tonight. One more vaccine brand got emergency use authorization in the Philippines. That's the Russian jab Sputnik V. It adds to the list of vaccines which may be used on senior citizens. Available AstraZeneca shots will now be used as first-dose vaccine for healthcare workers. The president gave the move a go signal as the government expects 900,000 of its doses to arrive next week. And in the hopes of curbing the rising surge in infections, the government is bringing back a number of restrictions, but said this is not a return to MECQ. These big stories right after the break.
Good evening, you're still watching The Big Story. Another vaccine may now be used on senior citizens after the FDA granted Sputnik vaccine emergency use in the Philippines. AstraZeneca shots will also now be used as a first-dose jab on healthcare workers as approved by the President. The latest updates on the vaccines in this report by Greg Gregorio.
4 COVID-19 vaccine candidates may now be used in the Philippines. The Food and Drug Administration granted Gamaleya Institute Sputnik V emergency use authorization. Data shows that the Russian vaccine is 91.6% effective overall. It's fully effective against moderate and severe COVID-19 cases. It requires 2 doses with a 21-day interval.
After a rigorous and thorough review, the FDA is granting emergency use authorization to the Sputnik V GAM-CoV-Vac.
The government seeks to procure at least 10 million doses, 2 million of which may arrive next month. It may be used on adults aged over 18 years old, including senior citizens.
If you read the Lancet report, about 1/4 of them had comorbidities, and 10% was for senior citizens. And it showed that the efficacy of the drug was quite uniform among all age groups.
So far, aside from Sputnik V, only Pfizer and AstraZeneca are locally approved for the elderly. As for Sinovac, Vaccines Czar Carlito Galvez said they're still waiting for data.
Sa ngayon nakikita po natin na medyo mahina po yung side effects o may natawag ng very mild side effects ng Sinovac. Nakikita po natin na baka pwede po rin po talagang gamitin po ito sa mga seniors.
Speaking to Radyo 5, he claimed that 11 of 15 countries have inoculated senior citizens with Sinovac. The FDA is open to revising Sinovac's EUA if necessary.
It will be up to the manufacturer and the distributor of Sinovac to provide data that will show that they have tried it in people who are above 60 years old and that it is safe for use.
Galvez says 400,000 Sinovac donations will arrive March 24. 1 million Sinovac shots bought by government will follow March 28. About 900,000 doses of AstraZeneca via the COVAX facility are expected next week. President Rodrigo Duterte has approved the use of all on-stock AstraZeneca shots as a first dose to all medical frontliners. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
The Health Department is now considering deviating from government's initial vaccine program. The DOH is looking to redeploy vaccines from areas with low COVID-19 cases to regions that are seeing increasing infections. Health Secretary Francisco Duque III says the borrowed vaccines will be returned once additional vaccine supplies start coming in.
Papakiusap ko yung mga lugar na mababa ang uptake ng vaccines, baka pwedeng ipahiram muna. Dahil yan naman ibabalik. Nga lang kasi dito talaga may emergency tayo sa NCR, sa Calabarzon, sa Region 3 and CAR and Region 7. Kasi sayang, baka ako ma-expire, sayang naman.
With COVID-19 cases continuing to soar, the government is once again tightening restrictions in what some compare to MECQ protocols. But are we reverting back to MECQ? Maricel Halili has the details.
Starting today until April 4, operations in driving schools, traditional cinemas, arcades, libraries, museums, and cultural centers in all areas under General Community Quarantine or GCQ will be suspended.
Yung mga sasakyan namin, hinuhulugan namin yon. Nandun po yung point na, yung time na talagang dapat magsasara na kami. Kasi syempre, di ba ang hirap, tapos kahit naka-lockdown or sarado kami, yung mga office namin po, tuloy po kasi ang bayad nun.
There will also be limited mobility in tourist spots, except for open-air attractions. According to IATF Resolution Number 103, essential business meetings and religious gatherings will be limited to 30% venue capacity, but local governments may expand the capacity for religious activities to up to 50%, depending on the situation in their area. All restaurants and personal care services will be allowed to operate at half capacity, while cockpits will be suspended even in areas under modified GCQ.
Sinusubukan po nating ipababa talaga ang numero ng COVID cases na hindi po nagsasarado ng malawakan ng ating ekonomiya.
Health Secretary Francisco Duque III said implementing targeted restrictions to minimize the mobility of people is better than resorting to a total lockdown.
It's part of the circuit breaker concept. More targeted restrictions without resorting to a widespread lockdown.
While the IATF has not approved the imposition of circuit break lockdowns, Roque did not deny the possibility of a stricter quarantine.
As a last resort, pwede tayong mag-increase ng quarantine classification pero napakadami na nga po nagugutom kaya kinakailangan buksan natin hanggang maaari ang ating ekonomiya.
Taking back a previously announced travel policy, Roque clarified that all Filipinos and not just OFWs will now be allowed to enter the country. But all foreign nationals will still be barred entry from March 22 to April 21, with exception to diplomats and their dependents, those involved in medical repatriation, and foreign spouses of Filipinos. Inbound passengers at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport are still limited to 1,500 a day. For News 5, Maricel Halili, We Are One News.
Time for our next look at some of today's big stories. Pork producers cautions the Agriculture Department from using antiviral compounds against the African swine fever. Pro-pork warns that it may cause the development of new ASF variants like what happened in China. But the DA assures hog raisers that products are safe. Pork producers also want a larger contingency fund of up to 20 billion pesos for the hog industry. Isang Bayan hits back at critics saying it's too early to launch such coalition for the 2022 elections. In an interview with One News The Chiefs, Isang Bayan conveners Howard Calleja and brother Armin Luistro said there's no better time to address the country's concerns than now. The two said the unified opposition can't just sit back while the administration rolls out more mistakes. Columnist Mon Tulfo claims that PNP Chief Debold Sinas has been vaccinated against COVID-19 as early as last year. The police chief tested positive for COVID-19. Tulfo said Sinas will not die from the infection as he had received smuggled Sinopharm shots in November. The PNP vehemently denied these claims. Time for another quick break. When we return, a survey shows that majority of Filipinos believe it's not safe to publish anything critical of government. The sentiment is most prevalent in Mindanao. And just how crucial is Filipino food in the world's history? Well, the first circumnavigation of the world may not have been possible without it. That story right after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. Filipino food has been criticized a number of times for lack of identity or flavor. But 500 years ago, it played a crucial part in world history. Mobile journalist Stanley Gahete gives us the front seat to the story.
Food has always played an integral part of Filipino culture, but it also plays an important part in our history. 500 years ago, our ancestors fed the starving members of Magellan's party when they arrived in Homonhon.
Kung hindi pinakain ng mga Pilipino, yung mga Espanyol dito, patay na sila. Wala tayong pag-uusapan na circumnavigation of the world.
The explorers had to eat shipboard rats and even boil and eat the ship's ropes.
Imagine mo kung ikaw ay nagbabiyahe mula Espanya, iniikot mo ang mundo, maubusan ka na ng pagkain yan.
When they reached what is now the Philippines, the natives fed them what seemed like exotic vegetables and fruits, and coconut wine, now known as tuba.
So those are the original flavors of the Philippines. Fresh, there's something fresh in our flavors.
Chronicler Antonio Pigafetta wrote down the food items they ate while in the Philippines.
Ang mga sinaunang cooking methods natin ay yung kilaw, it's a matter of cooking in liquid fire. Meron tayong mga nilaga lang, tapos grilling.
In the decades that followed, Spanish writers took note of the food that was uniquely Filipino.
It must be 1615. Pedro San Buenaventura documented it. He described kilaw as adobo de los naturales. So, which means we already had adobo even prior to Spanish colonization.
And in the years that came, Spanish culinary influence became more prominent.
Inintroduce nila sa atin ang concept of saprito, yung paggisa, yung mga labor-inducing cuisine like gumawa ng relleno, gumawa ng kalyos, gumawa ng paella.
Filipinos blended the Spanish taste with our own local flavors. And with this fusion, our identity became stronger, more prominent, and perhaps more valuable. Food, there and ours, then and now, shape our culture and our history.
Baka dapat tayo naman ang mag-share. Ano ba ang na-influensya natin sa kanila? Anong nai-offer natin sa kanila? We Filipinize it, whatever is palatable to us.
Stanley Gahete, We Are One News.
Let's take a look at the biggest stories on print and online. The Philippine Star reports the Supreme Court will be discussing the proposed creation of a special committee for the protection of lawyers. Chief Justice Diosdado Peralta said the request from the UP College of Law faculty will be included on the on-bank agenda next week. This will also be his last full court session before he retires on March 27. SM Investments Corporation will be buying out Davao businessman Dennis Uy's entire stake at ferry operator To Go. Business World Live reports that SM Investments will purchase Chelsea Logistics' 31.7% stake in To Go at 8 pesos and 50 cents per share. This gives them majority stake, adding to their current 30.5 stake. And this from News 5, a majority of Filipinos, or 65%, believe it is dangerous to publish anything critical of the Duterte administration, even if it is the truth. This is according to the latest SWS survey. The same survey showed that the sentiment was most prevalent in Mindanao, Duterte's home region. And for the big story in sports, 2 Pinoys are in the running to become an apprentice to One Championship CEO Chatri Sityottong. Baguio-based mixed martial artist and single mom Lara Alvarez escaped the reality show's recent eliminations. Fellow Filipino Louis Sanggalang, meanwhile, made a strong impression from the onset with experience in business and mixed martial arts himself. There are 16 candidates overall vying to win a one-year, $250,000 job offer to work directly under Sityottong as his protege.
I want to inspire women with my story, with how I went through things in my life as a single mom, as a student, as a farmer's daughter.
Kaya rin ako sumali dito because I want to be a global leader, no? I want to be a leader who's recognized across the globe. And, tataas talaga natin yung pandila natin.
You can catch The Apprentice One Championship on One Sports at 9 p.m. and its premiere on TV5 tomorrow, 11 p.m. A 75-year-old Asian woman fought back after being assaulted in San Francisco, leaving the attacker on a stretcher. The suspect was identified as 39-year-old Stephen Jenkins, who was also allegedly responsible for attacking an 83-year-old Asian man in a separate incident. People took part in Asian solidarity protests in different parts of the United States in light of the Atlanta Day shooting.
Many
Asian descent took to social media to condemn the Georgia spa shootings, posting reports about the incident. Lost actor Daniel Day Kim on Instagram quoted Martin Luther King Jr. in his caption, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." He urged followers to speak up with the hashtag #StopAsianHate and "Enough is Enough." Crazy Rich Asian star Gemma Chan likewise shared articles on Instagram and asked to stop the dehumanization of Asians. To All the Boys actress Lara Condor on Twitter urged followers to wake up, check in on, and stand with Asians. Several Westerners also called for unity and a stop to Asian hate, including host Ellen DeGeneres, singer John Legend, and Hamilton star Lin-Manuel Miranda. For News 5, MJ Marfori, we are One News.
The human voice has 4 basic types: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. For a South Korean a cappella group, there seems to be a 5th one: notifications. The 5-member Maytree imitates iPhone sound effects with a lot of precision. They did the default ringtone, the marimba, and even the annoying alarm. But Maytree is not only memeing, they are also in for serious business. They have 3 studio albums, and have won international awards. And more seriously, they can also do Microsoft Windows sounds.
Oh, that's something that we can do.
That
on
was Windows
TikTok,
95 or 98?
Ang galing, super galing.
Yeah. Well, you came from a Catholic school, so I'm sure that you did your share of singing. Can you do ringtones?
Toot, toot.
Okay.
Well, it's 7,103 cases today. Let's remind everybody to please stay safe. We are not in MECQ, but we can do voluntary ECQ, right?
And remember, Professor David's warning, if we don't be careful, we could hit 11,000 per day by the end of the month.
So please do stay safe, everybody. That wraps up today's big story. Catch us again Monday at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Edlin Gao.
I'm Gretchen Ho, and we are One News. Have a safe evening.